Right, thanks, Liz. Sorry about that, everybody, and thank you for coming. So my talk is about, well, it's about pessimism, about the future, and hence it's also about optimism, but I'm going to be focusing on pessimism. And I'm going to start by saying what I mean by pessimism and what I mean by the future, or which aspects of the future I'm going to be talking about. Okay, so imagine something which I hope will never happen to you. Imagine that some huge asteroid is heading for the Earth, and if it hits, you know that it's going to end all sentient life on the planet forever, right? So it'll never evolve again in the history of the universe for some reason or other. Maybe the Earth is going to be destroyed or something. But you have the power to deflect it. All you have to do is press a button, and that will cause the asteroid to head off into the universe, and we can keep going as we are. So most people, when they think about that case, say they would just obviously press the button. And on reflection, they may say they're doing this because they're optimists. They think that the future of sentient life on the planet overall is going to be good. Of course, we know it's not going to be good in every respect. There will be some bad stuff, but the optimistic view is that overall the future is going to be good, and therefore the right thing to do is to deflect the asteroid. The pessimist is the person who says, no, I'm not going to do that because the future's going to be bad. Now, the discussion between the optimist and the pessimist should probably depend on a second order discussion about probabilities and expectations and how we assess them, because the optimist probably wouldn't say, oh, I'm 100% certain that the future will be good. And maybe some pessimists would say, well, I'm not 100% certain the future will be bad. So in that respect, they might be agnostics. But what I'm going to look into is a pessimistic position which doesn't really rely on probabilities. So this is a pessimistic position which says, right now, I know that whatever happens in the future, it's going to be bad. In any ordinary common sense of no. And this view, this pessimistic view, relies on what some people call discontinuities of value, which sounds a bit technical, but actually, I mean, it can become very technical, and it does cause all sorts of problems in welfare economics if you take it seriously. I mean, it kind of, if there are discontinuities, it kind of blows welfare economics out of the water pretty much. But that doesn't mean to say there aren't any. Okay, so here are some that some people might find plausible. Okay, so the examples are a bit weird, but the points are not so weird. Okay, so imagine you reach the end of your life, and it turns out the universe is even weirder than you thought, and God says, well, I'm actually going to continue your life for you, and it can go on forever if you want, and you'll just be drinking lemonade the whole time, and you'll always be drinking lemonade, and it'll be enjoyable. You won't get bored of it. You'll just have the experience of drinking lemonade. That's it. Or you can have, I don't know, 6 months to read Jane Austen's novels, and that'll be the end. Some people think, purely from the point of view of your own happiness or your own well-being, it makes sense to choose the Austin. It doesn't matter how much lemonade pleasure you get, it will not outweigh the pleasure and other goods that you may get from reading the Austin. So that's what I'm calling a good discontinuity. One good, the Austin, is discontinuously valuable when compared with the lemonade. You can't trade off one against the other. Okay, here's another one. This is a less pleasant one. So here, you end up, unfortunately, you end up facing the devil at the end of your life. And the devil is not, it's not completely horrible. And the devil says, well, one thing I'm thinking of inflicting on you is 50 years of the most horrible agony. And yeah, I mean, you can go for that if you like. But there's another option, which is the pain from a hangnail. When you have a sort of, a bit of your nail kind of comes apart from the rest of the nail, and it's a bit irritating and possibly a little bit twingy and painful. Yeah, I've got that on offer as well. And you say, well, yeah, I'll go for the hangnail. And the devil's a bit annoyed because the devil wanted to see you going through this 50 years of agony. So the devil says, well, yeah, I mean, the hangnail is going to go on forever. It's never going to stop. Many people say, well, I choose the hangnail. So that's a bad discontinuity. Now ask yourself whether there could be good discontinuities. Okay, and I'm calling this discontinuity the T discontinuity, where the question is, how much good would it take to counterbalance being subjected to an hour of electric shock treatment? And sadly, many people have these forms of torture inflicted on them all over the world. So there's a huge amount of torture taking place. And I've never myself been tortured, but I've read some accounts of what it's like, and it really sounds very bad indeed. And people who've been tortured in different ways sometimes say that it's about, electric shock treatment is about the worst, because somebody described it as having every bone in your body broken over and over again at the same time. So imagine an hour of that. I mean, also imagine what it would be like. Let's say you some extra hours will be added before, so it's coming. You're dreading it, and you experience all the emotions that people who are tortured say they feel: the despair, the fear, the dread. So there we are. The T discontinuity has on one side an hour of this kind of torture, as against any amount of good whatsoever. Right. So you can think about it in terms of your own life. Is it obviously completely irrational to, if you know there's an hour of electric shock torture coming, is it obviously irrational to, from your own point of view, to commit suicide painlessly if you can, even if you're quite young and you've got lots of other good stuff coming in your life? Well, some people might say yes, it is, because there is no discontinuity here. I'm not saying there is. I'm just saying there might be, and it's worth thinking about it. And it may be relevant to how we think about the asteroid. case, and I'm going to avoid what people call spectrum problems. So these discontinuities cause problems when you create a spectrum where, you know, there's like 59 minutes and 59 seconds of electric shock torture and so on. And there seems to be some point when something dramatic happens. Just going to avoid those by not talking about them. I mean, if you think about, yeah, so we're thinking about, for example, Ozzy Osbourne and Telly Savalas. You know, it's just obvious that Ozzy Osbourne is hirsute. He's hairy, got lots of hair on his head, and Telly Savalas was bald. It's just obvious. We don't need to go into the question of when somebody who's bald becomes hirsute as hair start growing on their head. So I'm avoiding these sorts of problems. We're just talking about the clear T discontinuity. Here's some evidence from somebody called Jacopo Timmerman, who was tortured, I think, in Argentina in 1981. Now, I put this down not to add, as it were, further evidence to the claim I was making about the badness of torture, because you probably accept that it's really bad. What I want to say is that it's so bad that people seem unable, they very often say, I can't tell you how bad it is. They find it very difficult to describe it. That seems to be relevant to our case, because really what I'm trying to argue is that it's not unreasonable to take pessimism seriously, right? It could be correct. It's not a crazy view. So if we're thinking about something like the T discontinuity, then we have to take into account that the pain is very hard to describe, even by people who have experienced it. It's also difficult to remember pain. This happens to people, not just to people who've been tortured. So the great philosopher Henry Sidgwick, who wrote some excellent chapters on measuring pleasure and pain, perhaps some of the best ever discussions of this issue, in his great book, The Methods of Ethics, said he couldn't remember how bad seasickness was. I mean, at the time, he'd be thinking, like, this is the worst thing I've ever experienced. But then later on, he couldn't remember how bad it was, really. He could remember the nausea leading up to it, but the actual seasickness itself, he couldn't remember. And this is an example from Harriet Martineau, who was a writer in the 19th century, and obviously one of the great Martineau family, reflecting upon the fact that she suffered from a uterine tumor, agonizing, which recurred frequently throughout her life. But she's reflecting upon how difficult it's going to be for her to remember once the pain has passed. That's another consideration to take into account. Okay, so that's pessimism. What does it imply? Well, some people, not implausibly, would say, well, it implies that you should let the asteroid hit the planet, because you know that loads of people are being tortured, and you also know that sentient beings are going to be suffering horrible agony, as long as there are sentient beings, probably. But even if at some point in the future we could actually remove suffering from the world, it's a long way off. So if you allow the asteroid to hit, you'd be preventing a huge amount of suffering. And we know from the T discontinuity that all you need to do is prevent 1 hour. And what you're doing is justified from the point of view of whether the outcome is good or bad. And somebody might say, well, no, I couldn't do it. Obviously, the right thing to do is to press the button and deflect. And one question you should ask yourself, if you believe that, is whether you're experiencing status quo bias. because you're like, here, the Earth is existing, and there are all these beings on it. But imagine you had the option of bringing about a world which will contain many millions of lives of severe suffering, much worse than nothing for those living these lives, and many billions of lives of very high quality. Okay, that's a world very close to ours. Would you bring it about? I'm not sure I would. At least I wouldn't be certain that I should, because I'd be thinking about the people or the sentient beings who are going to suffer because of what I've done. So that's the question, whether or not to push the button. Bernard Williams, interestingly, thought about this issue in an article that he published in 2006. And unsurprisingly, he was so good at spotting implications. He would say, look, don't just think about this planet. We're just one planet among others, and we may be able to we may be able to influence what goes on in other planets. And this raises a question for somebody who's inclined to push the button, whether actually it would be better, even if you believe in the T discontinuity, but perhaps it would be, you'll want to minimize suffering. Perhaps it would be better for us to continue, and then in future travel to other planets, destroying them, if we think that they contain conscious creatures that suffer. So those of you who've read science fiction novels will probably have come across so-called berserker probes, which are meant to be these missiles which are sent off from Earth, and they just detect sentient life and destroy it. Now, I am remaining neutral on all these issues. I'm just saying that I think people are too quick to assume that extinction would be bad, and it's a question at worst, at least taking seriously. And the conclusion is interesting, because it seems like if you are a pessimist, practically speaking, you agree with the optimist, but for very different reasons. The pessimist will not push the button in the hope that we would be able to destroy more sentient life in future. So there it is. I'll stop sharing, having said thank you.